Okay. Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Carlson's Coffee and Conversation. Welcome back to those of you who've joined us for our kickoff session last Friday, and welcome to those of you who are joining us for the first time today. We're glad to have everybody on. This is our second conversation in a series of three. We have one more, same time, same place next week, next Friday. And then we're going to move to every other Friday. And we'll be sure to get the information out to you well enough in advance so you can get these on your calendar. But this will be hopefully a regular session that will grow, and you'll get great information, health information from Dr. Carlson for, every other week. A few words of introduction about Dr. Carlson. It may be new for some of you, may not be new for most of you. Dr. Carlson, as many of you know, is a fellowship-trained geriatrician. He leads two organizations dedicated to seniors, Be Well MD and Be Well Clinical Studies. Be Well MD is an in-home medical practice providing primary care services to seniors in their homes. And Be Well Clinical Studies is a medical research company conducting trials on medications that are being developed to prevent and treat diseases and conditions for older adults. So I'd like to also today introduce another colleague of ours, Tracy Christensen. Tracy is the Chief Scientific Officer with Be Well Clinical Studies. She'll be joining Dr. Carlson in the presentation today as the topic about drug development is really the world she lives in. And so I know you'll enjoy her insights to the discussion. So please remember, these sessions are conversational. We want you to ask questions. We want you to share your perspective, be a part of the discussion. You can use the chat feature on your screen. You can type in the question and I'd be happy to ask your question for you, or feel free to ask it directly to the group. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Dr. Carlson, and I'll once again just ask you to mute yourself for now, and then when you have something to say, then please unmute and join us.
Thanks, Anne. Good morning, everyone. I see a few friendly faces, and it is a pleasure for me to be here with you. As many of you know, and I'll continue to share, I have a few pleasures in life, and coffee is one of them. Coffee is an interesting beverage, and one that I fancy myself a layman's expert on coffee because I consume so much of it. It, of course, occurred to me, am I hurting myself by drinking so much coffee? And so I started doing some of the legwork surrounding the literature of coffee consumption. And my conclusion is that coffee is a wonderful beverage, and it has way more benefits than risk. And most individuals can consume coffee without limit and without hurting themselves. And in fact, there is good data to suggest that there's a connection between longevity and coffee consumption. The more you drink, the longer you live. And of course, when I see data like that, it warms my heart every cup of warm coffee that I drink. And after last week's kickoff Coffee with Carlson, what came up in my inbox, and maybe this is the metaverse attacking me, but the European Journal of Preventive Cardiology published their report, and it showed up in my inbox, and they looked at 468,000 plus individuals who consume coffee and compared them to others who did not consume coffee. And I think they divided them into high consumers, greater than 3 cups per day, versus no consumers. Versus light consumers, half a cup to 3 cups versus 0. Uh, and what they found is that the high coffee consumers had a lower risk of death and their cardiac function was improved. And so again, I've got more data to support my enjoyment and this habit of mine. My vice is coffee. And, you know, in the world of vices, that's not terrible. And even my wife has no vices. And Gwen has finally shared my vice of coffee. I get her coffee every morning now. And it's a nice ritual for the two of us. But anyway, the link to the study that I just referenced is there on the screen, and I encourage you to take a look at it and learn more about how coffee can be beneficial. Now, I've got to warn you, as a physician, there are a few of us, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 5 to 10%, that are going to have negative side effects from coffee consumption. And that includes side effects that might be as mild as excess GI gas or indigestion or diarrhea, all the way up to serious side effects like cardiac arrhythmias. Now, we don't want you to overdo it and elicit one of those problems. So if you find yourself not feeling well after your third or fourth cup of coffee, you might question maybe it's the coffee. So anyway, just a word of caution. Now, let's see here. I think we are going to dive into our topic today. We've got about 20 more minutes that we can talk about drug development. Back in high school, of course, most of us remember high school yearbooks, and then on the last day, we all get our book and we run around to our friends and we get them to sign our books. Christina Ben, who is now the only nuclear physicist that I know, I remember her writing in my book, "Mark, you're a cynic." And in the moment, as an 18-year-old, I didn't know what that meant. I thought it was a compliment. And then later, of course, as I expanded my vocabulary, I learned that Christina was being jocular with me. And she introduced me to the world of cynicism. And I think those who know me best on this call, Tracy and Anne, many of they might agree with Christina. However, I don't think that I'm a cynic. I think that I'm a realist, and I look at things, or I try to look at things objectively. And when you look at the world of drug development, it is easy to become a cynic because of what the media foist upon us. The drug companies are very, very effective at what they do, and therefore a lot of money flows into drug development and through those companies that that are so important to drug development in the world of 2022. And because of that money, they are open to many avenues of criticism. And many politicians and activists and lay people find it very easy to criticize the sponsors of drug development, the pharmaceutical companies. I have been part of that criticism in the past, but I don't want to criticize them without acknowledging the incredible value that they bring to the table. And if you look at drug development over the last 100 years, over the last 50 years especially, you will recognize that much of our current health, much of our current longevity is due to those evil drug companies and their drug development. Every day, I suspect that every one of us takes advantage of what the drug developers, the drug companies, have given to us in the form of producing these incredible molecules, these incredible drugs that treat cancer, heart disease, liver disease, infectious disease, kidney disease, neurologic disorders. If any of you suffer from Parkinsonism or multiple sclerosis, excuse me, all of those diseases have been advantaged by drug developers, i.e. the big pharma companies that we hear about so often. And so I want to applaud them for their hard work and for the risks that they take. And this, the next 10 or 15 minutes, I'm going to describe a little bit about that risk, which will help you understand why a new drug that comes to market that might treat your cancer or might treat your heart failure, why it costs maybe $1 billion or $5 billion from the very beginning to the very end of that process. And that kind of risk should not be taken lightly. So I just want to go through real quickly the 5 steps to drug development, and I'm going to focus on the part primarily where you could be involved. And so the first step is discovery. And in the past, prior to the modern era, say in the 1700s, 1600s and before, drug discovery was primarily in the form of plants, i.e. humans would be hungry, they would eat a plant, they would consume it, and it would make them feel a different way. And out of that, they would start thinking, well, maybe I can help make me feel better by consuming this plant. And there are a myriad of examples of how current day drugs, the most common one is digitalis. And that is a drug that is produced from the foxglove plant. And the digitalis that was used so commonly with heart failure is one of the best heart failure drugs in the beginning, and the one that I remember from my medical school training. So that plant produced digitalis, and it was used in heart failure, and it still is used in heart failure because it helps the heart pump. And that is the best example that I can give you right now, but there are many, many more if you look in medical history. And that was the way that things were done before the modern era. Now, fast forward, and we have many more tools available to us. For instance, the Human Genome Project, which mapped out every gene in the human system, and that has led to many, many drug development projects that are ongoing right now. And then we've got molecular biology that allows us to understand the size and shapes of proteins, and proteins is where most of the cellular function happens. And by modifying proteins and affecting proteins, we discover many, many drugs there. And so the drug discovery process used to be in the natural world. Now it's done in the laboratory. And then once we identify the proper molecule, the proper, oftentimes protein or other smaller molecule that can have a therapeutic effect, potentially, then you go into the preclinical research. And that research is primarily done in the laboratory, either purely in the test tube, or nowadays, computer modeling, or once you get a drug that is valuable enough or looks good enough, then it goes into the animal model. First, you start with the small animals, i.e. Mice, rats, and then if you prove some sort of effect in that model, you move up into the higher animals like the primates, and then eventually we confirm in that preclinical research that yes, this is a molecule that has effect in biological systems. And most likely, if it's going to take the next step, step number 3, that molecule has affected the lower animal models in a positive way. And so then clinical development is where that molecule is taken into the clinic, meaning in order for that drug to ultimately be FDA approved and given to all of us, we have to make sure that it's safe and effective. So there's two primary questions that are being asked when you get to the clinical development point. Number one, is it safe? Are we going to be able to give this agent, give this molecule, give this drug to you and me and all of our family and friends in a way that is safe and doesn't cause harm? And that safety is paramount. The other question that we're asking, and this too is very important in terms of bringing a drug to full development, is does it work? Of course, if coffee is our topic, the question is, does coffee make us live longer, make us live better with better heart function, better brain function, anything like that? But we also have to ask the question, is it safe? Does it cause harm? And those two questions are balanced very carefully in the clinical drug development. So why did I title this session today, Yes, You Can Be a Drug Developer? And the reason that I titled it that is because the drug development process, we think about it in terms of the big pharma, the big sponsors, the scientists in the laboratory, those scientists in the field down in the Amazon rainforest, trying to discover new molecules to help us. And those people are vital and important, but as vital and as important are you and me in this process, because the clinical development has to be done properly. And it has to be done in a way that doesn't involve 1 or 2 or 100 or 200 individual volunteers. It requires thousands, and in many cases, tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of us volunteers who are going to willingly help answer the question, is this drug safe? And is this drug effective? Those two questions. And I think that the clinical development process is fascinating. And when you dive into it, it is exceedingly complex. The number of steps that it takes to take a drug from the laboratory through clinical development, this step 3. Step 3 has literally thousands of tiny steps to get into step 4, onto step 4. And without the volunteer study participants, the study subjects, i.e. you and me, who are going to participate in that, we can't get to step 4. And so then step 4 is the FDA review. And that is where the sponsor of the drug development process, they then have shown that the drug is, number 1, safe, and number 2, effective, meaning it does what it says it does. And in our example of coffee, it lets us live longer and it doesn't hurt us. And for the vast majority of people, that is a perfect example, because it does have good data to show that it lets us live longer and it doesn't kill most of us. It doesn't hurt most of us. And I apologize to Tracy because she warns me not to talk about those kind of things. But forgive me. I forgot my cue. But anyway, in the world of coffee, if the FDA was going to approve it today, they would have to approve it because we've got so much evidence of benefit. The benefits are big and the risks are small. And so when you have a benefit risk ratio like that, then the FDA says, yes, let's approve coffee and allow the market now to take it to the public, allow doctors and patients to benefit from this advance, this development, and we will then see the sponsor take it to the physicians and allow us to tell all of you, you know what, have a cup of coffee in the morning, enjoy it with your spouse, and try to make your morning a little better, try to make your longevity a little better. And following that process, then you'll start hearing your doctors suggest that in your exam room, this drug might help this problem. Following which, after we go through the FDA review and approval, it goes to the market, and then the sponsor is going to do exactly what I just described. Convince the doctors and the public that this is something that they should at least consider or try. And then we go into the post-market safety monitoring process. And this is important as well, because the clinical development and the FDA review process, steps 3 and 4, may not discover everything that might happen when you expose the broad population to the drug. And so now, instead of tens of thousands of individuals taking coffee every morning, now we've got 1 billion people drinking a cup every morning. And we might discover some things there that wasn't identified in the studies that were done. And so the sponsor doesn't just put it out there and sell it without doing the post-marketing safety monitoring. They will continue to do step 5, potentially as long as they will continue the post-market safety monitoring as long as that drug is on the market, theoretically. So that drug, if there is a problem that shows up later, when the billions of people are enjoying their cup of coffee every morning, then we might discover that, oh, a lot of people get indigestion with this. And so we got to let them know that one of the problems with drinking 14 cups of coffee a day is you might have to take a Tums as well. So anyway, though, that is the kind of thing that the post-market safety monitoring is about. And so that takes you through steps 1 through 5 of the drug development process.
Dr. Carlson, I have a question from one of our participants.
Sure.
They ask, how long does this process typically take? And it seemed like the COVID-19 drugs made it to the public very quickly.
Yeah, okay. So the typical drug development process from step 1 through 5 is, I think the last time I looked, was approximately 10 years, but it varies. It could be in the pre-pandemic world, it might be as little as a year in the world of influenza vaccine, but that's not a perfect example, because the influenza vaccine, every year, the new vaccine only takes about a year to develop. But the real development of that influenza vaccine stretches back decades. So that's not a perfect example. So pre-pandemic, if I was going to give you a hard number, I'd say 10 years on average. Post-pandemic now, we're seeing some changes. And the reason for that is because the pandemic is so dramatic, meaning the risks to the human population is so great that there was an impetus on the World Health Organizations, not WHO, but the different organizations like our FDA, our National Health Institute, to lower the barriers to drug development in order to get these drugs to market and into us as quickly as possible to mitigate the enormous risk of the pandemic. And this process of drug development and the safety, pre-pandemic was way up here. And I think the lay public or the lay media has done a disservice in describing this drug development process and the safety involved, going from way up here all the way down to here. And that's not accurate. The safety is still at a very high level and at a very acceptable level. I don't know if you saw my hand drop there, but it goes from here maybe down to here. And the safety mechanisms that were in place pre-pandemic are still in place. And if you recognize that the drugs that have been approved by the FDA here in the United States over the last 2 years for the treatment of COVID-19 or the prevention of COVID-19, those drugs are authorized not by the FDA under the typical authorization process, but under the EUA, Emergency Use Authorization, and they are still under that process. But the regular FDA safety profile way up here is still applied to these agents. It's just that under EUA, Emergency Use Authorization, the regulations were reduced a little bit to speed up the development process to bring them to market a little more quickly. And the safety of the FDA way up at the top is still there, and they will eventually, all of these agents are being developed still, meaning those agents are still being monitored, and we could put another step between 4 and 5 here, which is the emergency use authorization step. And really, it's not a step in between. It would be step 4B under the FDA rulings. And ultimately, the FDA will approve probably all of these drugs under the normal process. It's just taking more time. And so that's a long-winded answer to a simple question about the time that it takes to develop these drugs. Tracy, do you have anything else to add to that long-winded answer of mine?
Yeah, I think what I want to impart to everybody is that for the COVID vaccine research that took place at clinical research sites, when you get into phase 3, you're looking at tens of thousands of patients. And so clinical research sites around the country and around the world still did the research in 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000 patients and more in order to confirm the safety. You've heard safety a lot in this, and safety really is the top priority in all the clinical research we do. Safety is number one, and I would say that it came to market quickly for a lot of reasons. I think the government put a lot of money into it, so there was a lot more sites that could do the work on more patients, on more study volunteers, and so that helped us with confirming safety. The second part is that EU review process was pushed to be quicker, not necessarily in a less safe way, just it became priority over everything else that the FDA is reviewing.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
it was moved up to the top.
So and Tracy, let me interject also. Fred Lord posed a question about the safety and how it applies to the elders. And that is one of the reasons that I and Tracy and Ann are all part of 2 organizations, Be Well MD, focusing on elders, but also Be Well Clinical Studies, because historically, elders have been ignored in the drug development process, meaning drugs are developed and tested in the healthy volunteer population, and doing it in elders is harder. But it is important in order to know the safety. safety issue, the safety around this drug in the 90-year-old, not the healthy 35-year-old who doesn't have any medical problems. And that's part of the reason that Tracy and Ann and I work with Be Well Clinical Studies, is to bring these drug development studies into the elder population as well, so that we do understand the safety profile for a drug like Tylenol or Trazodone or lisinopril, and how it affects you, Fred, not just that 35-year-old healthy guy. And so that question goes directly to why we do what we do with Be Well Clinical Studies. So, oh, Anne, I
Yeah,
think you're muted.
I just unmuted. So I think the other part of that question is, do current drugs get tested further as they're used over time?
Oh, absolutely. Meaning once we have a drug that is approved, let's say we get the next or the first drug that treats dementia. Because that is one of the projects that we're very interested in. So we get a drug that is approved and developed for the treatment of Alzheimer's dementia. After the FDA approves it, the next step is going to be to test that drug and go back to step number 3, not just for Alzheimer's dementia, but we'll look at it for Lewy body dementia or vascular dementia or any of the other dementias to find out, does it work as well or maybe even better in these other dementias as it does in Alzheimer's. And so, yes, the work will continue after approval, almost certainly for every drug that is developed. When a developer invests $5 billion in an agent, and it only makes sense, we want to make sure that we uncover every place where it can benefit us. And so that means you develop it for one disease, and then we try to find out, does it work for another disease? And the literature, the medical literature, is rife with examples of a drug first being developed for disease A, and then finding out that it works even better in disease B. And that process is ongoing. And in fact, we in Be Well Clinical Studies, we look at those kind of studies all the time. And I'm going to have to warn you, I've got about 3 more minutes.
Okay, I have one more question from one of the attendees, and they're asking how many participants have to be part of step 3 for it to move to step 4?
Oh, and it really is variable depending upon the drug. But at minimum, you're looking at many hundreds, but more typically you're looking at thousands or tens of thousands.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from the group? All right, so all of these are being recorded, and they're on our YouTube channel, Be Well. We have a couple of senior living communities who will be broadcasting this as well. So please feel free to check us out on YouTube if you'd like to review the session or pass this along to somebody in your family or some friends. So any other comments, Dr. Carlson, Tracy, before we sign off for the day?
I was going to quickly say, and if you come and see us at Be Well Clinical Studies, we'll definitely offer you some coffee.
Coffee for everyone. All right, so we'll see you all next Friday, 10 o'clock for our third session in this series. All right, everyone, have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.